want making voting for Speaker a tough one. I don't want to go to the floor and win with 220 votes. I think the best thing for our party right now is that you have 247 votes on the floor. If we are going to be strong, we got to be 100% united.
A magnanimous Kevin McCarthy pulling out of the race for Speaker, but saying he will stay on as Majority Leader. So the vote that was expected today in the House Republican Conference has been postponed, and the search continues for a Speaker. What is next for the House GOP? Let's continue the conversation in Washington, D.C. via Skype. Our good friend, Bob Walker, the gentleman from Pennsylvania who served so capably for so many years in the House. And here on the anchor desk, the former chief of staff to Congressman Walter B. Jones of North Carolina, Glen Downs. Bob Walker, let me go back to you and a question I raised before the break. So McCarthy wants to stay majority leader. Does that mean Steve Scalise stays in place as the whip and all the other ambitions are put on hold for those other leadership positions on the slate?
Well, as you pointed out, there's lots of ambition in the Congress. You and I both experienced it. But my guess is that the rest of them stay in place and they seek somebody else to step in to run for Speaker. I just heard a little earlier that Kevin McCarthy is backing Paul Ryan for Speaker. The question there is whether or not Paul Ryan actually wants to be a candidate for Speaker. I've heard him say that his ambition is really to do a good job as chairman of the Ways and Means Committee.
Of course, Bob. What's the old saying in Washington? As a former Ways and Means guy, I appreciate this. Only two jobs worth having. One is to be president. The other is to be chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. But Glen Downs, to you now, raising the specter of a Paul Ryan. There's another mega establishment guy that raises the hackles of conservatives in the grassroots.
Well, that's right. Well, the problem is that the leadership in the Republican Party in Washington either will not or cannot accept the fact, heretofore, that they're really the leader of two distinct factions. It's almost like a coalition government in a European system. And so in order to be successful and to successfully lead that coalition, you have to recognize that you're dealing with those two different groups of people. So if you don't change that mindset, it really doesn't matter who you put in there.
Well, let's turn back to Bob Walker because...
Well, I'm told, just to comment on that,
sure.
JD, I'm told that the Freedom Caucus will probably support Paul Ryan if, in fact, he's a candidate.
Well, I got to tell you, Paul's a capable guy, but he's an open borders guy. He's an amnesty guy, and that is a non-starter, as we've seen in the presidential campaign with the great success of Donald Trump. Here's my question for you, Bob, and I guess we're making a giant assumption that Dan Webster and Jason Chaffetz may not end up as Speaker. Is there an experienced member of the House who can put together the coalitions that Glenn just outlined? I got a couple of guys in mind, but I'd like to hear from you. Who do you think could be a Mr. Inside and a Mr. Outside to unite the factions?
I don't really have a good answer for you on that because I think things are in a state of high chaos at the moment. The fact that Boehner has announced that he will stay on as Speaker until a new Speaker is elected at this point does tamp down the chaos some, but I'm not certain that we know who might emerge from all of this. Heck, out on the internet right now, my name's being thrown up again.
Well, you heard it. Now, here it is, Bob Walker for Speaker, and we should note that Linda Smith of Washington in, I guess it was 1996 or 98, voted for Bob Walker when that came up. You remember that, I remember that, and at the time you were out of the Congress, I believe. But,
right, and still am.
Yeah, but it's very clear in the Constitution, the House shall choose its Speaker. You don't have to be a member, which brings me back to a guy who's not a member but a capable staffer in Glen Downs. Bob Walker, Newt Gingrich. Is there anybody in the House, say for example, who do you think your old boss Walter Jones might cotton to in a race like this? Well,
it's going to be a narrow group of people that can meet the requirements that you talked about, meet the mainstream and these more insurgent Freedom Caucus type folks. You know, a good example would be somebody like Jeb Henseling from Texas, who's a committee chairman, been the House Republican Conference chairman, solid conservative. So he's somebody that could do their job as Speaker, and I think still kind of get those people on the right flank happy as well.
And Hensarling was, well, he was reluctant last time. I've got another Texan I'm thinking about I'll talk about later in the program. Back to Bob Walker very briefly, Bob. If they come to you, we just want to hear it here first, would you accept the speakership if the conference turns to you there off Capitol Hill?
No, look, there are people talking about a temporary speakership at this point. I think that would be a bad idea. I know when we walked in to the office and I was Newt's chief lieutenant and discovered what a big job that was, it's not a job and it's not a place where you put the third person in line to the presidency on a temporary basis, because it is a huge job. That
it is, and we will have to leave it there. Coming up, more disputes over national security. We'll tell you about them.